I'm thrilled to welcome back SVPG partner Chris Jones to this episode. We'll be tackling the common product misconceptions we see around the world. We explore some of the myths we hear most frequently as we coach companies around the world and why some of these beliefs may be misguided. Where my hope in this episode is that we can provide some insights on how the best companies in the world work differently. And I'm confident some of these misconceptions will resonate with you. Chris, welcome back to Product Therapy.
So great to see you again, Christian.
Well, I'm so excited about this topic because as we work with companies all around the world, there are a couple of things that probably give you the cringe in either how they describe things or some things that people may believe to be true about how product teams work or how they solve problems. I just want to jump right in because I'm sure there's some that drive you crazy. What's kind of a big misconception?
I mean, maybe they drive me crazy. I prefer to look at them as teachable moments. They're typically indications of working in a different model and different sort of incentives and expectations. I'll kick it off with one that I see. Probably it's more common that I see this than I don't see it. Like it is in the majority of companies that I work with. And the misconception is that product management decides the what and engineering decides the how. Maybe there's a variation. Product management is the what and the why, but engineering is the how. Engineering is always the how. And there's good intentions here, right? We're really trying to ensure that people can do the jobs that they really are set to do and that we're not getting into each other's space. The way this misconception is usually playing out within product management, like how they see engineering, their job, because we're doing this, they're the how, we're the what. We're trying to keep them focused on coding. We're trying to protect them from the details, protect them from all of these randomizing elements of the business, and just ensure that they have a constant stream of stuff to work on, right? This is a big, expensive asset, and we don't want it to lay fallow. And then engineering, the way they see themselves in this whole thing, because they're bought into this whole idea too in many cases, they are really trying to make sense of a lot of conflicting business requirements. They are trying to address all of this stuff. And at the same time, they're trying to deal with technical debt. They're making a lot of decisions with really incomplete information. The result of this whole thing is that everybody is frustrated. So you've got product management is frustrated that things are taking too long. Product management is frustrated because engineering seems to be taking liberties with how things get interpreted. Things aren't implemented quite right. Engineering is frustrated because they've got this impossible list of things to complete. They don't have a lot of clarity or context. They often have this general feeling that product management doesn't know what they're doing. Hopefully, you're starting to see that this is really not the way that the best companies work. The best companies are much more coming from the place that engineers are often the single best source of the ideas. So that means not just the how, but the actual what. Engineers know what's possible right now. And we are putting them in this what, how thing. We're putting them very, very downstream from any ability to contribute ideas on how to best solve a problem. We don't see, and I'm saying we as the product managers, because I was a product manager, we don't see them as part of that. They don't see themselves as part of that. And, you kind of retreat to your camps in this way. In the product model, it is absolutely the opposite. The best ideas are going to be coming from engineering here.
Chris, I want to push a little on that because I see companies that often ask for a RACI or a DACI or some kind of, we need to know where somebody's work starts and where someone's work stops. And these are all artifacts of a project model in terms of role clarity versus a product model that emphasizes true collaboration. But if somebody were asking, okay, so who decides what? Who decides why? Who decides how? What's kind of your typical response to that?
The RACIs, those do make me cringe, by the way, whenever I see those. But those are the opposite of collaboration. They really do force us to retreat into our corners. This is my job. That's your job. I'm going to do mine. You don't do mine. I'm not going to do yours. And that drives us apart. We lose this ability to get the benefit of this cross-functional collaboration as you're trying to figure out what is going to be happening. So when you're working in the product model, many of these disagreements, many of them just go away because everybody collectively realizes we are collectively responsible for finding a solution that's going to work. And through this collaboration, it becomes very, very apparent what the right thing to do is. That all sounds obviously very pie in the sky and perfect. I'm not going to say that it always plays out that way. Sometimes it does get trickier, and we do have to ensure somebody is going to make a decision. I believe we've talked about that in another podcast, what collaboration actually looks like. If we haven't, we probably should. But the bottom line is that the starting place is not one of, I make decisions about this and you make decisions about this. The starting place is one of, we are doing this together, we're in this together, we're going to work a solution together and find something that's going to be right for the business and right for our customers.
I've seen a flavor of this misconception that even extends itself within the product management discipline to the role of the product manager and the role of the product leader. It's almost my job is to define the what problem we have and how dare you tell us to go work on this. And it's often for me a coaching moment on like reminding people like, what company do you work for? This is not your company. Like it does give us problems to solve. They do tell us the outcomes, the why in some ways. It's up to the team to decide the best way. And the way I describe it in my mind in a sports analogy is like everybody's in the huddle, deciding the play. Everybody is solving together. And that's what true collaboration is solving a problem together. I think this is a really common misconception.
I'll just add one more thought on that, and then I want to hear what your first misconception is, but I'll just talk about it as my own experience. As a young product manager, I subscribed to this, and I felt this tremendous responsibility about determining the what and articulating it really clearly to engineering. And when I got coached on, look, this is a whole, there's a team, there's a huddle, those folks over there that you're trying to dictate the work to, they are going to have better ideas than you. So you are going to be much more successful in your job if you can open this up, share the context with them, and help them feel that kind of responsibility for genuinely solving the problem. And that has absolutely been true. When I look back at the coolest product innovations, really the best ideas, nearly all of them came from engineers on the team. They didn't come from me. They didn't come from my bosses. They didn't come from the sales team. They didn't come from the customers. They came from those people.
So hard for leaders, so hard for a talented group of product managers to accept that the best ideas don't come from them. And you often have to explain it to them. It's, you might have a good idea, but it's probably not the most innovative because you're not close to technology.
So we'll put a period on this one. If you find yourself wanting to say product management decides the what and engineering decides the how, or if somebody else says that to you, it's an opportunity to really interrogate what's going on there and say, is this kind of how we want to be working?
That's good.
All right. Yeah. How about you? What's a misconception that you deal with a lot?
One common one that I see, and I work with large enterprise companies, probably streams from the role of design. And this belief that design or designers are really downstream in the work of requirements. And we hand off work to design. And often in many companies, I don't even know I don't beat up design because it's often a role that is understaffed. If it's even staffed at all, sometimes it doesn't exist. And if it's even staffed, it's underutilized, or I always say it's emotionally or verbally abused by everybody. And often I think this misconception streams from what people think the role of design is in the organization. There's this sense of, design, they just make things look pretty. And in kind of more modern terms, engineers are like, that's all they do. I can find a design language stuff. I can make things look good enough. Why do we need design? And so some companies who put design even in a marketing function, they are really focused on one aspect of design, which is the visual design component. And I think Steve Jobs always said it best. Design is not what it looks like or what it feels like. Only design is how it works. What I've seen in the best companies in the world, I often tell people, I often cannot even differentiate between a product manager and a designer. They are so embedded in how a problem is solved. They are a true partner in how we work, in how we decide, because this design is a totality of it. It's not just, can people use the product? Does it work the way people expect it to work? But it's how we experience the value of the product. And I joke with people of how the iPhone is averaging like $1,000 an iPhone, and maybe a Samsung is $300. And then you look at the feature list of capabilities, and it's to the tune of 14x the amount of features in one. And I'm like, the camera, the iPhone comes from Samsung's patent. And it's not about capabilities or features. Design is how people experience the values. It's why people will pay $300,000 for a Ferrari. It's not just about the brand or the look and feel or the features. It's the totality of all of those things, how it makes you feel, the luxury. So it's often a common one. And I often have to elevate the discipline of design talk about what happens, the cost of design or the value of design to get people to understand how to use it.
Yeah, I'll expand on that. I mean, you're definitely hitting on that almost immeasurable value of design, especially on the consumer side of things. But how design works in an overall product experience, there's a lot of different attributes that kick in when you're on B2B products. Bottom line, the way I have always framed this is that most companies, especially the ones that have understaffed design, see it primarily as a delivery role. You're coming up with it's not a delivery role in the same way that engineering is, but it kind of is, right? Their main job is producing the assets that are being used by engineers, being implemented. They may do some things right at the front of that, but it is quite downstream, as you said, really, really tactical. When companies begin to realize that design is actually fundamentally a discovery role, that's when you begin to realize, oh yeah, okay, this is why we need to pair a designer with a product manager, because that is discovery. This is why we should be expecting designers to be prototyping at a velocity so far beyond and at many, many different levels of fidelity than what we're used to. I will often coach companies that a good designer is doing maybe 24 prototypes in a week. Most of them are going to get thrown away. The whole point is they're part of the discovery process. Either they're iterating with the team or they're iterating with stakeholders or they're iterating in front of customers. That is where the majority of the work is. Yeah, they're going to be doing the delivery assets, the assets that engineering is going to require, but maybe that's 10% of the time, and that's going to be very spiky. So when people realize that this is actually part of the fundamental discovery engine, that's when you start to get a little bit of an unlock and an aha on how strategic that role is. There's one other element here. This is one that I will admit I stole from Marty Kagan. Marty has a great one of these, but this idea of it being downstream of requirements, like the designers ingest the requirements and they do something with those requirements. And in the worst case, like you get requirements that have wireframes in them, right? And the designers are actually inheriting these wireframes and then kind of trying to, that's like the worst case. The Marty Kagan answer to this is, look, if you're a product manager and advising or guiding an engineering team, would you give them pseudocode and ask them to work from that pseudocode? And of course, that's ridiculous. You would never do that. That's insulting. This is really the same sort of thing that's going on with a good designer. If you're giving them those sorts of wireframes rather than having them solution that stuff out, it's that same sort of insult.
Yeah, insult. They always just make it look pretty. I'm giving you the wireframe, add the colors, and fastest way to insult a designer. And often when I see teams struggle with solving a problem, it's often my first question. I say, where's your designer? They're like, what do you mean? I say, there's some magic with how they work and this is a problem-solving aspect of the discovery in the work. Same way with engineering. Designers have this typical abstract type of creative sides to them, and engineers are very concrete, black and white. And there's some magic with how we solve problems that designers bring a tremendous amount of skill to. That's a really good example. All right, let's keep going because I'm getting excited.
Sure.
We're talking about this. What else comes to mind as another misconception?
Yeah, I was thinking about another one. It's that product managers should be hired primarily based on their domain experience, right? That's the misconception. We need to hire people who really know this space. They know this tech, or they know these types of customers. They know the industry. Usually how it looks is they basically say, well, our industry is so complex. My industry is so specific that there's just no way you can train somebody up. The interesting thing is every one of my customers will say that. Apparently, everybody is above average when it comes to complexity, right? And the logic here is that it takes so long to acquire that knowledge that we want to short circuit that. And this is actually coming from personal experience. This has almost never worked out for me. When I've hired somebody primarily based on some amount of domain experience, the problem is that domain experts have a very hard time separating what needs to be done from the fact that it's always been done this way. And in fact, if you're hiring them primarily on their domain expertise, they already have a sense of value based on this. It's done this way. I'm going to teach you, my new company, how to do things this way. The problem here is it leads to this dogmatic thinking, and it is very difficult to get to a place of looking at a problem with fresh eyes. You can think about it this way. So there's a product thinker out there that we've quoted a few times, Shreyas Doshi. who describes true domain expertise is domain knowledge minus domain dogma. And you can start from it this way, right? We want somebody who has tremendous domain knowledge. The question is, how do you separate the domain dogma? And do you do this by subtracting? You start with this person and you take out the dogma. Or is it easier to start with nothing and add the domain expertise? And my experience has been the latter works a lot better. It's hard to separate the dogma once it's actually gotten established. And let's see, a couple of other things. Really quickly, I don't want to leave people with the impression that a product manager needs to be naive to a domain. You don't want to stay in this position of not knowing. You very, very quickly have to get beyond that ignorance, right? You have to learn the domain. It takes a concerted effort very early in the job, supported by your manager. You're becoming the acknowledged expert in the customers and in the data and in the product and how the industry works. You do that, you build that stuff up. You have to do it very quickly and aggressively, but you don't hire somebody in who has that right from the start because you could get into this position of domain dogma.
And I work with big enterprise companies. I often hear scale and we're regulated or there's complexity in our work. And I often have to talk to executives. I say, you're actually making the case for why you need product managers. It's like, what do you mean? The job is not to figure out new regulations, but to solve problems within these constraints. It requires a certain amount of creativity. This is the problem-solving muscle. And to your point of when you get someone with domain dogma, I've been in this place for 30 years. This is how it's always done it. This is what the rules say. We typically saw the first fintechs in the world all came from compliance. They all came from places where banks or institutions, we cannot do this, we cannot touch that. Most innovation in that industry came outside of the people that had permission.
You're talking about the banks. I directly experienced this. One of the first startups I worked at had a product leadership job. This was a company that pretty much created a new category within information security, was relatively successful at putting something on the map that hadn't been there before. There was a real sort of developing problem, but there was no way that the industry actually talked about it, and the technology really wasn't oriented this way. The initial founders of the company, as well as the entire executive staff, had very, very little security background. There was one of the co-founders, there were three co-founders. One of the co-founders, and only one, had deep security knowledge. The rest of us, we were new to it. We had a lot of enterprise experience, but no real security experience. And if you talk to most of the early people in that company, there was a lot that went right for that company, but there was a real magic that came from us learning that domain. And it resulted not only in a pretty dramatically different take on how the technology worked, but actually how the go-to-market worked. We sold to a very, very different buying center than classic security products would have been sold into. And as a result, the valuation of the company, the ASP of the product, what we were charging for it was much, much higher. The nature of the value that we were delivering was much, much higher. I think at least some of this came from us learning the domain rather than coming in being deep domain experts. Not everything works that way. I don't think you can always take that as a rule, but it was a firsthand example.
It's an important point. People do ask me the question, if I had a choice, would I pick someone with deep product management expertise or someone with deep domain expertise? And I often say a good product manager recognizes that to be good, you have to have some deep domain expertise.
Exactly.
And I say, look, it probably takes 3 years to really get a good product manager. You could probably get some domain knowledge in 3 months if you really focus on that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's probably a great place to wrap that one up. So your turn. Do you have another misconception?
I hear this one a lot. Our job is to give the customer what they're asking for. And I hear so many flavors of this. Customer centricity or customer focused in some ways. The customer is always right type of team, and the customer says, they want this. Our job is to give them this. Now, in technology product management, we typically argue customers don't know what they want. They don't know what they want until they see it. They don't know what they want because in many cases, they don't even know what's possible with technology. It's almost the same challenge I give to executives when I'm tired of telling an executive, they're like, I've been in the business a long time, or I know the customers very well. I know what they want. And I say, look, it's not impossible to argue that you're right about what the problem is or what the right outcome may be. But if you're not close to technology, you may not have a clue to know what's possible. One of my favorite Bezos quotes is, the biggest mistake you can make is listening to your customers. He follows that up by saying the second biggest mistake you can make is not listening to your customers. And this argument that we listen to our customers to have a deep understanding of their pain, of the problems, the challenges that they have, it's up to us to come up with a way of solving that. I was remembering reflecting on the study on the old Walkmans, those CD Walkmans. They were doing a focus group on it, and they were asking several kids. They were like, okay, we're going to try new colors of the Walkman. He had this traditional black color of a Walkman. And they had red and yellow and new colors. And kids were like, oh, I like the red. I like the yellow. So they finished the whole focus group and they were like, look, you all can pick any of the samples as a thank you gift. Take a Walkman that you like. All the kids took the black and they left. It's a reminder like what people say is often different from what they do. Also, to the extent we don't do focus groups in product work because customers, in many cases, they don't know what's possible. They are not playing with technology. The way we'll kind of talk about Steve Jobs saying you run 1,000 focus groups, no one will ever ask for the iPhone. Or Bezos will say no customer ever asked us for Amazon Prime or AWS. I think the key is our job is to understand customer problems and how do we leverage technology to solve them. So it's not that we're ignoring what customers are saying or the feedback or the idea that we're not trying to give customers what they want. But you want to understand this is the customer's best interpretation of a solution to their problem. It's our job to find something that you love, but also works for us, that we can make happen.
There's a couple of places I come in on this one. The first one is, especially with kind of new product managers, a lot of times they will set their roadmap based on looking at which things customers are asking for the most. They'll come up with a prioritized list, they'll sort it that way, and they'll just be implementing those solutions that way. And I think if you find yourself working that way, that's a good indicator that you are not out there actually understanding the problems. And yes, there may be some signal in what they're asking for. It may be very correct that this particular feature is something that the product actually needs. But we need to understand the why behind that, because there may be something much better, much easier, much more effective for the customer that nobody's considered because the engineers haven't gotten a look at it, back to that very first misconception. But I do want to ask you about how you advise people in the very real B2B situation where a sales rep comes back to you and says, look, we cannot close this deal, or maybe even this collection of deals, without this particular feature. For whatever reason, the market has decided, or these customers have decided, it is a particular feature that they need. How do you advise in those cases?
I typically respond almost the exact same way to even ideas or feedback from customers or sales, which is probably that line of, I want to make sure we succeed when we do it. And that's typically my framing. I say, look, a customer wants this feature, we want this capability. A salesperson, look, we're not winning this deal if we don't have this feature. My first response is always, this is great. I want to make sure we succeed when we do it. I would love to understand what problem they are trying to solve. What will this feature do that will help them? Because I need to be able to measure that whatever I build is doing that. And sometimes I explain to salespeople, I'm like, look, remember that last time we did that feature you told us to do? You see, the customer is still not happy. Now we have to do another feature. That means we failed to understand what they actually wanted to accomplish, and we focused on their vision of the solution. So my framing is always, look, if we want to make sure we succeed, it's not just good enough to know what it is, it's good enough to understand the problem it's going to solve and how the customer will know.
I think that's a good response. I mean, in many cases, we still end up having to build it anyway.
That's right.
In some cases, the reason for it is really dumb, but it is still required to win the deal. And we've done enough work on the product side to realize, yeah, this is right. This is a deal worth having. It is worth us dragging this thing along, even though only one or two customers have gotten it. This shouldn't be the rule, right? You don't want to be operating this way because you're going to end up with a bag of junk as a product that is completely unmanageable. You might have closed a few short-term deals, but sometimes you have to do this.
I could even argue sometimes it's more than sometimes. The idea being, I think many product purists have this idealistic view of if there's not a customer outcome, it's not good. Product teams exist, yes, to serve customers, but in a way that works for a business. Winning a deal is a business outcome. Whether it is to get revenue, if there is evidence that this attribute allows us to get an outcome of winning a deal, we recognize that that works for our business, building this future. However, the measure of our job is not just making our business happy. We have to solve it in a way that customers love as well. When somebody comes to me and says, look, the outcome here is that we want to win the deal. So I know I'm going to get to this feature, but I just don't want to build it and check the box to win the deal because the customer is still going to use it. We can build it, check the box, win the deal, but retention goes down.
The trick for me, I think, on this stuff is obviously on the product side, we can't be purists. We have to realize that we're running a business. On the other side, on the sales side, they have to understand that if this is the only metric we're going after, winning this deal, winning that deal, you're going to end up with a Frankenstein of a product that's unmaintainable and doesn't actually deliver value. It might close deals over the short term or close a handful of deals over the short term. We've always called these specials, right? When you're doing something special on behalf of a customer. When it really is the case that it is a special, we've not validated that there is a larger customer problem there. The bar is very high to get that approved. Like you usually have to escalate it pretty tough. It's not random salesperson can't make this happen. It has to go up pretty high. And there's typically a quota on them because there needs to be pain. Everybody needs to understand this is not a good thing long-term for us to do it.
It's an important point. I like that framing. Like it needs to be painful. Chris, I feel like we could talk through a lot of examples here. It may be worth us doing another session to cover some more of these misconceptions.
Sounds great. Yeah, these are fun.
Want to learn more? Until next time, please check out svpg.com, sign up for our newsletter that Madik Hagan puts out, join us for one of our workshops near you, and get access to all of the articles and content we put out. And thank you to everyone for joining us. Until next time, have a good day.
A quick disclaimer, while this podcast is named Product Therapy, it is not hosted by licensed therapists or mental health professionals, and it is in no way a substitute for professional mental health services. We recognize the importance of mental well-being and encourage anyone facing personal difficulties to seek support from qualified professionals. See www.findahelpline.com